When Charlotte stepped out of the cab in her cream-colored midi sundress and huge sunglasses, she asked the cab driver to pop his trunk so that she could pull out the carton of wedding stuff that was in there. He did, and she pulled out the carton. Her bill was $30, but she gave him $50, and he thanked her and drove away. She pulled the carton to her chest and walked into the building. The doorkeeper, Miss Sue, ignored her greetings when she offered them to her, opened the door for her, and she walked through. She was confused at the woman's disposition. The woman had always been friendly to her when she lived in the building with her sister. When she brought in stuff, she always offered to help her carry them up, but today, she looked away like she did not see Charlotte come into the building. When Charlotte lived there, on some Sundays when she baked croissants, she used to bring some down for the woman, and they would eat, as she told her all about her grandson's latest escapade. Charlotte thought it was all her fault. After all, it had been long since she showed up at the apartment. Maybe the woman was hurt that she moved out and did not come over to see her again. She made a mental note to bring some cookies over on Sunday and spend some time with Miss Sue. After all, she needed a break from the wedding planning as well. Planning a wedding was not easy at all. It required taste, patience, determination, time, sleepless nights, necessary ills and annoying family members, her sister, and, patience. Charlotte had been engaged for a year and had only begun her wedding preparations 3 months back. It helped that she was a professional baker and had worked for many brides before. As such, she knew some event planners because they had worked hand in hand before. She hired the most efficient one, Annette, to plan her wedding. Even though she was a baker, she could not bake her cake by herself. She asked her best friend and business partner Michelle to bake the cake. Harper was more than happy to bake the cake for Charlotte's wedding. Everything was going as planned. Her dad had paid for her venue, her fiancé stayed out of her way when she was busy, and her sister helped when necessary, like today. She wanted her sister to stick the invites in the envelopes and seal them. She knew that her sister hated jobs that kept her sitting in one position for more than 30 minutes, which was one of the reasons why she was a photographer, and that was why she did not inform her that she was coming over with a carton full of invites for her to work on. She planned to drop them off with her sister and pull the card of a distressed bride-to-be and beg her sister to help her work on them. No way that wouldn't work on Ava. When she got to her sister's door, she used her key, the one that she had used when she still lived there, to open up the door. She dropped the carton on the table in the living room and walked to her former bedroom. Her sister had turned it into her house studio, and she knew that she spent most of her time there. But before she could push the door, she heard moans come from her sister's bedroom, which was directly opposite her former bedroom. She gasped in surprise. So Ava was seeing someone. She knew it. She had seen her smiling over her phone a lot of times these past few days. Then, all of a sudden, she realized how much of a lunatic she could look like if someone saw her right outside her sister's bedroom while she was making love. So she quickly ran off, grabbed her coat from where she dropped it, and continued toward the door. She was wearing a pair of brown sandals, so her pinky toe hit the side of the couch in a hurry, and she bent down to nurse it. However, when she bent down, she forgot about her toe and fixed her eyes on the pair of shoes next to the couch. There was a man's shoe, definitely the guy in her sister's room, but what bothered her was that the shoes looked eerily like the ones she had given to her fiancé Mason 2 months back for his birthday. She shrugged it off as semblance. After all, the shoes weren't custom-made, but when she stood up straight again, she noticed a blue jacket on the couch. The jacket looked exactly like the one Mason had worn to work that morning. All the hair on her body stood erect as she grabbed the jacket and dug into the pocket. Sure enough, in it was Mason's phone. She would recognize that phone anywhere. After all, a smiling pic of her was on the lock screen. She flung it so hard against the wall that she was positive everything inside it scattered to shards. Then she picked up the carton of invitations that she had brought over and marched to her sister's bedroom. As she flung open the door, her sister was the first person who saw her because she faced the door, and Mason's back faced the door. She flung the carton at his back, her sister's eyes wide with horror as she saw her, and she quickly grabbed the sheet to cover herself. Mason quickly grabbed a pillow, and she wondered why he was bothering to cover anything. They quickly hopped in to close as she yelled insults around the room with her tear-filled voice. When Ava tried to come close to her, she hurled a photo of them that was on the dresser at her. The photo missed her, and Charlotte threw another one at her. She threw her sandals at Mason, who stood there in his boxers and struggled to button up his shirt. Ava tried again. Car, listen to me, please. No, you listen to me. We are sisters. Sisters, and you go ahead and do this? You are vile, Ava. Ava reached out to her sister. I know that you're hurt. I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Charlotte laughed, but it was a dry, mirthless laughter. You're sorry? You didn't mean for it to happen? Were you forced? Talk to me, Ava. Did Mason make love with you against your will? When Ava did not respond, she turned to face her fiancé. She flung her ring at him. You are a sorry excuse for a man. How could you do this? You were still going to marry me after plowing my sister? Her voice caught as she said, and to think I could not wait to get married to you. He moved out of the way for her when she walked to the door, and she picked the sandals she flung at him and whacked him on the head. From the way his jaw stiffened, she knew that it pained him, and she instantly felt a little better. Then she carried herself out of the room as Ava ran after her. Car, please just calm down. Talk to me, will you? Stop, she screamed at her sister. Stop following me. Stop bothering me. From what I just saw, it would be justified if I didn't talk to you again. So just leave me alone. You wanted him? You've got him. Now let me be. And she walked out of her sister's apartment, leaving pieces of her broken heart on the floor. She could not even go back to hers, because when she moved out of the apartment she shared with Ava, it was into Mason's sky-high condo in the middle of town. All her belongings were there, all the memories were there. So she took a cab to Michelle's. She cried so much during the cab ride, and the driver constantly sent her pitiful glances through the mirror. She ignored him. A plethora of emotions swarmed through her head, and she did not know which one to hold on to. No wonder Mason had been coming back home late from work for the past few months. No wonder her sister was always texting and smiling at her phone, but would never tell her who she was on the phone with. She felt like such a fool. She leaned on the cab's window as the car drove through the highway. Michelle lived with her girlfriend Megan some 20 minutes away from Ava's apartment. They were in matching shorts and jumpers and cuddling on the couch as they binge-watched their favorite series, How to Get Away with Murder. Charlotte rang the doorbell, and without waiting for any of them to answer it, she rushed in. They both looked up from the couch, and they immediately ran to her side when they saw her tear-streaked face and her wild hair from the number of times she had run her hand through it in frustration. Much to her gratitude, Michelle and her girlfriend did not even ask her any questions. As soon as they saw her distressed face, they engulfed her in big hugs, made her wash her face, and gave her a cup of cocoa drink with marshmallows in it to drink. Michelle knew that Charlotte had always had a sweet tooth. She drank from the cup as she tried to quell the tears that struggled to come out of her eyes. It pained her that Mason had not even uttered a single word of apology to her. It pained her that Ava said she really did not mean for it to happen. It pained her that Mason had not run after her or even texted her. She knew that she broke his phone, but if he cared even a little bit, he would have at least emailed her or sent a dove with a letter. Anything. God, had she been engaged to a pig? Did her sister not care about her feelings? Before she slept, she confided in Michelle about all that had happened. She cried as she recounted the story to her friend, and Michelle held her all through. She was livid. How could Ava do that to her sister? And that Mason with his ugly nose, too. But if she said any of these things that she was feeling out loud, it would make Charlotte cry harder. So instead, she held her as she explained everything to her in the comfort of her guest room. Charlotte said how she had stopped eating so much pastry so that she could fit in her wedding dress. She said she had already made her dad pay for the venue at the expensive hotel. She said how she hated the way Mason slept at night. She cried that she was no longer engaged. She cried that she had been betrayed. She cried that her chest felt as though it was on fire. Michelle held her all through, and finally, she fell asleep. Even in her sleep, she still whimpered. It was painful to see. Michelle adjusted her in bed and pulled the sheets up to her neck. Then she turned off the light and left the room. When Charlotte woke up the next morning, the blinds in the room she slept in were still shut, but since they were thin, the sun filtered through them and shone on her face. She was immediately reminded of her reality when she woke up, and her throat felt dry, so she went into the adjoining bathroom and rinsed her mouth. She washed her face as well, and in the mirror, the image of a sad girl stared back. She swallowed and walked into the kitchen, where she heard voices from. Michelle and Megan were hurtled close, peering at something on a phone, and when they saw her, they practically jumped and offered pitiful smiles at her. She took it. It was not their fault that her sister was a bitch and her ex-fiancé belonged in the gutters. However, Michelle's posture was more apprehensive than needed, and Megan would not even look her in the eye when she talked to her. She ignored their attitudes for as long as she could, but when she caught Megan giving her a somber, sidelong glance, she could not take it anymore. "Okay, guys, you're acting weird. What is the matter?" Megan gave a loud, fake laugh. "Us? Acting weird? Never." If Charlotte wasn't in such a bad place, she would have laughed at Megan's poor acting skills. Instead, she turned to Michelle and asked, "What's the matter with the both of you?" Michelle tried to stall by taking her cup to her mouth and taking slow sips of her drink. Charlotte stared at her until she dropped the cup and said, "Look, Charlotte, I know that you are upset, and this may upset you even more, but there is something you need to know." Slowly, apprehensively, Charlotte nodded. Then Michelle gestured for Megan's phone and she passed it to her. Well, Megan wanted to know what Ava looked like, so she asked for her Instagram handle and I gave it to her, Michelle said. Charlotte was impatient. "Okay, and then what?" And Michelle was at a loss how to relay the news to her. Then Charlotte groaned and reached for Megan's phone. As soon as she looked at the screen, she dropped the phone. Her sister was in a wedding dress and smiled broadly at the camera with a huge ring, the same one she had thrown back at Mason, and a raggedy veil on her brown locks. Mason stood next to her, his arm around her waist and a huge grin plastered on his face as well. Charlotte picked up the phone to look at the screen again. The background of the photo was so dimly lit, they may as well have had the wedding done in the basement of a frat house. Mason was in the same jacket he had worn to work the previous morning. Oh, so this is why he could not text or come after her. Not that his phone was broken or anything. He was catching a flight to Vegas or someplace. He was busy getting married to her sister. The same sister that beamed so radiantly at the camera in a way that a stranger would wish them a happy married life. Not Charlotte, though. She wished them a misery-filled one. She carelessly dropped the phone back onto the kitchen island, and Megan grabbed her phone and put it in the pocket of her jumper. It was probably a good idea, seeing as she had smashed Mason's own against the wall the previous day. Michelle sat down back in her chair, her faux okay mood deflated, and she put her head in her hands. For the life of her, she could not understand why. Why did they have to treat her like that? Was she not a good enough sister? Did she not go over with pastries any time Ava felt bad? Wasn't she always there for Mason? When his mom had her appendix taken out and he cried like a baby in the hospital, wasn't she the one that held him until his shoulders stopped shaking? Wasn't she the one that was available for him any time he needed her? What else did a person have to do to be likable? What else did she have to do for them? Why did they have to treat her that way? Maybe if it was just meaningless love-making between them, she would have felt better. But they had to go ahead and get hitched, barely hours after she caught them together. And Ava had the guts to post it on Instagram for the whole world to see. How dare her? And what was it with Mason? So if she hadn't caught them in bed, he would have still gone ahead to marry her when it was clear, from the smile he sported in the photo, that he was totally happy being with Ava. Had she been dealing with insane people all her life? Maybe she should have gone back home when Miss Sue ignored her. She never believed in signs, and she thought that those who did were only just looking for something to blame when something bad happened to them. Perhaps if she believed in signs, she would have walked right out the door the moment Miss Sue looked the other way as she walked in. Then maybe she would not have had the brain-racking image of her sister and her ex-fiancé tangled in bed together. Her shoulders began to shake and tears started pouring out of her eyes. Michelle and Megan ran to both sides of the chair and began to offer soothing words. She could register that they were speaking to her, but she could not comprehend what they were saying. Tears poured out of her eyes and her shoulders shook with the sobs that racked her entire body. Then her phone buzzed so loudly on the table that Megan nearly jumped out of her skin. She peered at the screen. It was her dad calling. Of course, she ignored it. She was not in the right headspace to deal with anyone, and she was pretty sure some nosy person, like their neighbor Katie, would have informed him of the picture Ava posted on Instagram. She stared at the phone until it stopped buzzing, and began to buzz again. Her father never knew when to stop calling. On a normal day, when she did not pick up her phone, he gave her about 8 missed calls. Then he would text her with the wrong emojis. And today, he called and called. A rational thinking person would switch off the phone. But rational thinking had left her the moment she sighted Mason's jacket on the couch in Ava's apartment. Suddenly, a surge of emotions flared up inside her, and she grabbed her phone at the 4th call, picked it up, and put it to her ear. Wide-eyed, Michelle and Megan turned to look at her. She walked out of the kitchen and back into the room where she spent the night. "What's going on, Car? I'm so confused. Katie showed me a picture of Mason and Ava in a wedding dress? Please tell me it's a joke." Her father gushed out as soon as he realized that she had answered the phone. She knew it was nosy Katie who told him. She sniffed. "I wish I could, Dad. I'm so confused as well. Oh, honey, what happened? Did you and Mason fight?" She yelled at her dad. "Even if we fought, does that justify his actions? Does that justify the fact that he went ahead to marry Ava? Huh, Dad?" Her father took some time before he responded. He was obviously sad, and he said, "I'm really sorry, Car. I haven't even fully grasped the entire situation. Where are you? Can I see you?" She felt sorry for yelling at her dad. It was not his fault that her sister and ex-fiancé were jerks. Her dad had done virtually everything for them since their mom died from cancer when she was 8. He made school lunches, and he would slip in an encouraging note by the side of their school bag each morning. He made soup for her when she was sick, and he binge-watched Gilmore Girls with her and Ava, even when he was tired from work. She sighed, "I'm sorry for yelling at you, Dad." She could imagine him giving one of his forced smiles over the phone as he said, "It's okay, honey. I know that you're going through so much right now. Can I see you? I want to see you. I want to know you are doing fine." She ran her hand through her hair as she sat on the bed. "I'm at Michelle's. I could forward the address to you if you want." "Please do," was his reply. And before he hung up, he told her, "You will be fine, Car, I promise. Whatever you're feeling now is just temporary." She nodded even though he could not see her. And in a tear-filled voice, she said, "Ava is a bitch, you know that, right?" He answered, "Yeah, she definitely messed up in this. I called her and it went to voicemail. When she calls me back, I will tell you what she says." Charlotte chuckled. "Don't. I don't want to know anything about her." Her dad was quick to respond, but maybe she cut him off. "I'm dead serious, Dad." He said okay, and she promised to forward Michelle's address to him. He said he loved her, and he hung up. 3 days later, in Michelle's jeans and Megan's crop top, she went over to Mason's place to pick up her stuff. Megan had to work, so Michelle went with her. Thankfully, there was nobody in the place. Maybe they were on their honeymoon or something. She didn't care. All she wanted was to get her stuff and leave the place as soon as she could. It was weird how the place she had once considered home and could not wait to get back to a lot of times in the past suddenly felt constrictive to her. The living room that she had shared so many memories with Mason in, the bedroom that they had painted together, the kitchen where he had stayed by the counter and watched her numerous times as she baked by the oven, every single thing. She took her head as though it would help her get rid of the memories and marched straight to the bedroom to pack her stuff. She emptied her side of their shared walk-in closet, and in spite, she threw all of Mason's smug-looking button-ups to the ground and stepped on them as she walked around the room to gather her stuff. When her bags were filled and she still had some stuff to pack, she emptied Mason's Louis Vuitton traveling bag and put her toiletries in it. She cleaned the containers of her hair products with one of his favorite shirts. When she was done, she walked out to meet Michelle, who was busy packing all her baking stuff from the kitchen. When they were positive that they were done, they had 11 boxes and cartons around them. They knew that it would take them each 5 trips to get everything downstairs, so they began with the heaviest. They dropped the bags downstairs next to the doorman and hurried back up to get the remaining ones. Michelle knew that Charlotte did not want to run into Ava or Mason as they packed, so she worked as fast as she could. But fate must have been having a field time throwing bouts of misfortune at Charlotte, because on their way back up for the last set of boxes, they met Mason. Charlotte walked past him like she wasn't going into his apartment, and Michelle followed her move. They hurriedly grabbed the boxes and turned to walk back out. When he bounced in through the door with a half-hearted, "Charlotte, I'm sorry, I really am," Charlotte felt her blood run cold. He met her in an elevator, asked her out, took her for dinner, dated her for 2 years, had been engaged to her for 1, and watched her go into a frenzy as she planned their wedding for 3 months. Meanwhile, the whole time, he had plans to run off to do a stupid little chapel in Vegas with their sister. She bent down, dropped the carton in her hand, picked up his TV remote, and threw it directly at him. It whacked him on the face, and she felt an immense amount of joy as he groaned out, "What the hell, Charlotte? You, Mason Brown, are an insensitive and disgusting man," she began. "Honestly, it appalls me how you can do something so cruel to me. Stay away, and then because you meet me in your place packing my stuff, you deem it appropriate to offer a lukewarm apology? If I were to ask you what you were apologizing for right now, what will you say? Cheating with my sister? Marrying her? Giving her my ring? Wasting my time? Treating me insensitively? Mason, where would you start from? Honestly, I would love to see you try." When he did not say anything for about 5 seconds, she bent down to pick up the carton that she had dropped to grab the TV remote, and she said to him, "That's what I thought. You have nothing to say. Have a nice married life and treat Ava right. I hope a boulder crushes both of you." Then she walked out of the living room. Michelle walked right out behind her after she grabbed the tiny crystal bowl that sat on his center table and flipped him the bird. Outside the apartment, Charlotte was not as strong as she had been inside. She sobbed as she hurried to the elevators, as if she did not want to break down in Mason's building. They made it out safely before she fell apart in her friend's arms. They were a sight to see. Michelle, as she held the sobbing Charlotte next to the boxes and cartons that surrounded them. Michelle and Megan offered their guest room to Charlotte to stay for as long as she needed, and she was really appreciative of them. She stayed in the room every day, with the blinds drawn closed, and watched movies until her eyes hurt. She had stopped crying after she left Mason's place. They were the ones that treated her badly. Why did she have to be the one to cry? She convinced herself that she was better off without them, and she ignored every one of the aggravating text messages that Ava shot to her. The third day after being stuck in the guest room, Michelle and Megan opened the blinds at 8 in the morning. The sun streaked down on her face, and it hurt her eyes, so she opened them up to find the couple staring down at her with determined eyes. "Get up," Michelle said to her. "Why? Is there someplace I need to be?" Charlotte asked as she nestled back into the sheets. "Yeah, the shower," Michelle said matter-of-factly. She hummed into her pillow, and Megan took a seat on the bed and said, "Come on, Char. You have fused into these sheets for some days now. You haven't taken a shower and you barely eat. You are harming yourself." Ugh. Michelle sat on the other side. "We get that you don't cry anymore and we are happy that you have achieved that. But shrinking into yourself, that's not the way to go. You would have let Ava and Mason take off your spirit, and they should not have the power to. They should not even be able to walk the same path as you. So come on, Char. Meg and I are here for you. Your dad is here for you. We can help you get through this, so please let us." Slowly, she pulled her face away from the sheets and turned to look at them. "But how? I don't even know where to begin." Michelle grabbed her hand. "We will figure it out together." She smiled sadly at the pair of them and said, "Thank you, both of you. I don't know what I would have done without you." They engulfed her in a hug, and Meg said, "Go and take a bath. You stink." Charlotte got relatively better. She hung out with Megan and Michelle in their living room, and she spoke to her dad every other day to let him know that she was doing fine. Then a month later, he offered her tickets to Maui for an all-expenses-paid 3-month-long vacation. She was stupefied. He had already spent so much money to rent the venue for the wedding that didn't hold, and only half of the fee was refundable. And now he was offering her a ticket to a tropical paradise to cool off, an all-expense-paid vacation nonetheless. He was the best dad ever, but she refused it. She said that it was too much for her, and she told him to return it and asked for a refund from the hotel he paid for. He told her that everything was non-refundable. Michelle and Megan urged her to take it. They said her dad was only looking out for her and that she needed the vacation. So, leaving her room in Chicago, or rather Michelle and Megan's guest bedroom, with nothing more than her mucked-up self and a suitcase full of suitable beachwears, she took the 9-hour flight to Maui, Hawaii. When she alighted, she took a cab to the hotel she was going to be staying at and checked in. The staff was nice and the service was top-notch. They welcomed her, wished her a pleasant day, and gave a brochure of the hotel's activities to her. She was already feeling better. Truly, there was something divine about the air of the tropical paradise. She was led to her room. It was fairly small, and there was a bed in the middle of it, and it was laid with immaculate white sheets. There was no single crease on the bed, and forgetting that the hotel staff was still with her, she plunged right into the middle of the bed. She was reminded of her company by a small laugh that was disguised as a cough. Feeling somewhat embarrassed, she told the man that he could leave, and she would figure out what was what by herself. He nodded and left. She walked out to the balcony. It overlooked a huge swimming pool, and since it was a tropical island, palm trees as high as the balcony swished around her as though to welcome her to their home. She smiled and leaned on the railing to look down at the pool. There were a few people there. A little girl wore matching swimsuits as her mom, and she wore sunglasses that were just as huge as her mom's as she pretended to read a book, like her mom did, even though it was placed upside down. Charlotte shook her head in amusement. Two girls sat by the poolside in their matching red bikinis and kicked their face in the water as they talked about something so funny and fell on themselves in laughter. As she wondered if everyone wore matching bikinis, she saw him. He was in light blue shorts that showed off his toned legs, and the bright sun shone on his wet dark hair, making it appear glittery. Also, and more prominently, he held a crying child in his hands. Charlotte turned away from the odd pair. Coming to Maui had been out of her sweet father's love, and it was solely for the purpose of rediscovering herself. She wasn't about to go around chasing any man, not now at least. The 3-month-long vacation was for herself alone, so she took a photo and sent it to Michelle and her dad to let them know that she had arrived safely at her destination. Then she took a long bath to get rid of all the grime she had gotten from the flight, and she fell into a long slumber. She really needed it. When she woke up the next day, it was noon, and there were texts from Michelle, her dad, and the notification from Netflix reminding her of her almost expired subscription. Do your worst, Netflix. Who needed to watch movies when they were surrounded by a sea of relaxing outdoor activities? She responded to her dad and her best friend and got out of bed. Her stomach rumbled, but she was too tired to go down to the restaurant or any other place around for breakfast, so she ordered room service. In no time, her food was delivered to her, and she dug into the bacon and freshly squeezed orange juice. When she was done, she thought of the first thing to do. She decided to have a pool day, so she wore one of the bikinis she had packed along, put her hair in 2 French plaits, grabbed her sunscreen and sunglasses, and stepped outside. The weather was nice, and there was only one other person at the pool, and it was the man with the crying kid yesterday. Of course, fate did not promise to make stuff easy for Charlotte. She put on her sunscreen, laid down on one of the deck chairs, and looked out into the bright water body. Just then, the blue shorts man, who was only 2 deck chairs away, noticed her and said, "Wow, you are really pretty." She turned to look at him. He was still looking at her, and he did not seem ready to take back the fact that he had just complimented a practical stranger out of nowhere. Thanks," she told him. He shrugged off the appreciation and asked her, "Are you a new guest here? Do they have new and old guests here? Because none of the hotel staff mentioned that to me." She answered him. He laughed. His laugh was rich and inviting and warm. She found herself smiling along. "No, that's just how my daughter and I describe the hotel guests," he explained. "Oh, okay. You guys must have been here for some time then," he nodded. "Yes, we have. Today makes it our 5th month here." "Oh, wow. Being in this beautiful scenery for 5 months? No wonder he looked so tan and refreshed." She hoped she would at least get some of the island's goodness before her vacation was over. "Wow, I wish I could stay here for 5 months, or an eternity even. The whole scenery is so magical and the air feels so fresh. My nostrils are tingling," she told him. He chuckled. She noticed that he liked to laugh. "Yeah, I felt like that when I first came here too. So, if you don't mind me asking, why have you stayed here for so long?" she asked him. His demeanor shifted slightly, and she thought that he would not answer the question. He did. "My sister and I have never been on any vacations before, so now that we have the opportunity to, we want to milk it to the fullest." She nodded. "But wouldn't it make more sense if you did something different every day, or at least every other week? Maybe Maui today, New Zealand tomorrow? That sounds fun, right?" He agreed with her. "It does sound fun, and that was the plan, but my sister fell in love with the island and her boyfriend, and now we cannot leave." Charlotte gave him a confused look. "I don't understand. Are you tethered to her or something?" He laughed and answered, "My sister is a bit of a wild streak, and she needs me around." Charlotte did not know him or his sister, and she could not argue with his logic, so she just shrugged and said, "Okay, you really are pretty," he told her again. "You are too," she said quite truthfully. His pearly white teeth gleamed in the bright sun as he smiled and offered her his right hand. "I'm Kyle." She took the hand. "Charlotte." The pool day Charlotte had planned really turned out to be a pool day, but with Kyle alongside. He stayed next to her and engaged her in conversation. They talked about everything from the weather in Maui, his job as a data analyst in San Francisco, to the tiny leaf that fell from a tree in front of them. She asked him about the kid she had seen him with the previous day, and he said that the child was lost, and he was simply taking him back to the hotel staff when she saw him. At the end of the day, Charlotte found herself looking forward to spending more time with Kyle. She was elated when he invited her for a night out with his friends and his sister. He said that his sister's boyfriend, Joe, had invited him over for a party at a local bar and asked if she was interested. She jumped at the opportunity. After all, she had come to Maui to meet new people, try new things, and clear her head. Kyle seemed glad that she agreed to tag along, and he asked her to meet him out front of the hotel by 7 p.m. that night. They left the pool by 4 p.m. Charlotte hurried off to her hotel room and took a shower to rinse the warmth of the sun off of her. Then she loosened her hair from the French plaits and let its light brown locks fall around her face. She put on a teal sundress and a pair of statement earrings and put on her subtle pink lip gloss. Then she wore a perfume, grabbed her purse, and stepped down in her brown sandals, the very one she had hit Mason on the head with when she caught him with Ava. Thinking of Ava, she hadn't texted her since she came out to Maui. Maybe her dad told her that she was not in town again, or she finally had common sense to let her be. They had hurt her so bad that she felt her heart crack in her rib cage. It was one thing to be betrayed by one person you loved, but two? Now, that was just wild. But today was not about them. It was about her in her beautiful teal-colored sundress, dancing to the music on the jukebox and drinking fancy island drinks with little umbrellas in them. Today was for her. The whole vacation was for her. She had never been so grateful to have such a thoughtful dad. True to his word, Kyle was out front of the hotel when she walked out at 3 minutes past 7 o'clock. He had changed from his blue shorts to a pair of brown ones and a Hawaiian shirt. He told her that she looked nice. She said he did too. They walked in comfortable silence to the bar. It was only a few miles up, and the gentle breeze that flew all around them only made the walk more desirable. Then they reached the bar, and Charlotte was introduced to Kyle's sister, her boyfriend, Joe, and Joe's friends. When she met Kyle's sister, she understood what he meant when he said that she could not be left alone. The woman had a short attention span, and she was all over the place. She hugged Charlotte when she was introduced to her, and the next second she was slapping one of her boyfriend's arms. She laughed at almost everything and drank a lot. But did that mean Kyle was supposed to leave his whole life on hold for her? She did not want to judge, but then it was hard not to. Was it not unfair to Kyle that he had to stick with whatever his sister wanted and treat his plans as secondhand? After the party, they walked back to the hotel. On the walk back, Charlotte brought up back the conversation about staying in Maui because of his sister. He said he thought they were done with that, and she said that he just could not hold it in. For her, his sister was a lot, but she was also an adult. She did not need someone to look after her, and maybe she would thrive better when not constantly being watched. Charlotte had just met Kyle that afternoon, and that night she was giving him suggestions about his relationship with his sister. Some people would have been offended by that. Some would have asked her to mind her own business and stomp out of their brewing friendship. Not Kyle, though. He said she might have a point, and that he would have to think about it. Then he told her, "You already know a bit about me and my family. Why don't you tell me something about you?" The most interesting thing about her family life was that she had a twin sister. But she could not just go ahead and tell him that, because her sister had wronged her in a way that she would rather not recall, and she had not seen her nor spoken to her sister in nearly 2 months. So, instead, she said, "Nothing is interesting about my family, but about me, though, I live in Chicago and I run a bake shop with my best friend Michelle." He said that sounded like fun, and she agreed. Owning a business with her best friend was one of the best decisions she had ever made. Right now, she was in Maui having a conversation with a tall, handsome man, while Michelle was back home covered in flour and making birthday cakes for the snotty little children of their customers. When they got to the hotel, he walked her to the front of her room door. He asked her if she would like to take a walk the next day at the public beach a few miles from the hotel, and she said she would love to. They exchanged contacts and said goodbyes. Charlotte was happy, and for the second time in Maui, she slept like a baby. She woke up late again the next day, and she spent some time in bed scrolling through her phone. She had deactivated her Instagram account, and after the whole fiasco with Ava and Mason, she reactivated it. She did the same to her Facebook, and immediately messages began to flood in. They were all from people she knew: neighbor Katie's daughter, her high school classmates, her nail technician, and lots of other people. Maybe they must have come across Ava's post. After all, they were all mutuals on the app, and now they wanted to get the full story from her. She knew that none of them even gave a rat's ass about her well-being or emotional state, All they wanted to hear was the story from the sister whose twin sister eloped with their boyfriend, and she would not give them that satisfaction. So she deleted all the messages, changed into a short and sleeveless shirt, and went down for breakfast. Time went by on the tropical island, and Charlotte and Kyle spent a lot of time together. They hung out at the pool, walked through the beach, went swimming together, and strolled through the town. It was all very nice. She was smiling a lot and was a lot better than she was before she came over on the vacation. Her father was right after all. One evening she had dinner with him in the restaurant downstairs. He asked her, "Do you have a boyfriend?" The question was just out of the blue, and it caused her to choke on her margarita. What? He repeated himself. If there was one thing she knew about Kyle, it was that he was honest. He said things as he saw them, and he did not take back anything he said. He seemed so sure of himself at all times, even when he was asking her questions like this. So she answered the question. "No, I don't have a boyfriend." He nodded. "That's good." And he did not say anything else. They had the rest of the dinner in silence, and when he walked her back up to her room, she blurted out what had been bothering her throughout dinner. "Why did you ask me that question during dinner?" His voice was cool when he responded. Because I wanted to know." She nodded her head. "I know that you wanted to know, but why?" Kyle did not answer her immediately. He silently walked beside her, and when they got to her room door, he said, "Isn't it obvious, Charlotte?" She liked how he always said her full name, and she liked the way her name rolled off his tongue. She turned from the door to face him. "Isn't what obvious?" Kyle shook his head at her as though it pained him that she did not see what he meant. But knowing him, he was certainly going to express himself verbally, so she waited, and he did. "I like you, Charlotte. A lot." It was funny because, as badly as Charlotte had wanted to hear those words from his mouth, she also did not want to. The past months had been confusing for her. She was undoubtedly attracted to Kyle, and she loved to spend time with him. And for that, she was glad that he liked her. On the other hand, she had just had a rough breakup from a long relationship, and the main aim of coming to Maui in the first place was to relax her mind and body. She was just fresh out of a relationship, she was dealing with a breakup, and she was not supposed to like him. Kyle stood next to her and studied her face. He keenly watched her face for her reaction. Then she knew that she had to tell him about her failed engagement. She said, "Kyle, there's something you need to know." As though he was expecting such a reaction, he said, "Okay, what is it?" It took a few seconds before she was able to start talking. She said, "So, remember when you asked me about my family and I kind of shut down about it? Well, it was because my only sibling, my twin sister, eloped with my ex-fiancé to Vegas." She rushed out the words because she did not want to spend more time than necessary reliving the whole drama. Kyle's eyes dimmed as he processed what she said. She stood and watched him carefully. "So, your sister got married to your ex-fiancé?" he asked, as though she did not just finish telling him everything. She nodded. He blew out a breath. Wow, that must have been painful. He was telling her? She was the one that soaked her pillows at night for about a week. Then he straightened up and looked back at her. That must have been some time away, right? She shook her head at him. "No, it was 3 months ago." He was bewildered. 3 months, he continued. "Wow, you don't seem like somebody who got jilted 3 months ago." The statement hit her the wrong way. What was she supposed to look like? So, because she was dumped, she would have to remain in a dark room and cry all day long? Kyle must have noticed how her mood changed, and before she could say anything, he went on. "I don't mean to offend you or anything. I did mean that as a compliment. When I was dumped 3 years ago by my girlfriend of 7 months, it took another 7 months before I could even smile at anyone without feeling like I wanted to cry. But you are strong. Your engagement ended just months ago, and here you are laughing and dancing and being yourself. It's admirable." Kyle did have a way with words, and they quelled the irritation that was building up inside of her. "Thanks," she told him. He shrugged it off like he shrugged every other appreciation she gave him for the numerous compliments he paid her. He said goodnight, kissed her forehead, and left. He did not talk about the fact that he had liked her. He did not talk about the fact that he said he liked her. He did not prod her about whether or not she liked him back as well. He just left. She walked into her room and fell face flat on her bed. It felt wrong to like Kyle, really wrong. It was not like she felt any pint of loyalty towards Mason. She did not feel like she owed him anything, and he was the least of her problems. What bothered her was that in barely 3 months, he managed to intrigue and smitten her. It felt wrong because she had loved Mason and she was going to marry him. But now that he ran off with her sister, at least she was supposed to be on her own for a while, right? She wasn't supposed to like someone for a while, right? The kind of feeling she built up with Mason after all the years they had spent together should not just dissipate into thin air, right? For the 1,000th time since she walked into her sister and Mason, she wished that it was a different girl. If it were someone else she had seen with Mason, her sister would have been there for her, she would have held her, and Charlotte would have talked to her when she felt confused about what she felt for Kyle, and how the thoughts messed with her head. So she called Michelle. Michelle picked up at the third ring. Her voice was sleepy when she said, "Why are you calling me so late, Car? Did something happen?" Charlotte checked her time. It was some minutes past 9 p.m., which meant it was way late in Chicago. She sighed. "I'm sorry, Michelle. I forgot all about the time difference. I'm gonna hang up now." She heard shuffling in the background, and she could imagine her friend adjusting in bed as she said, "It is okay. I'm already awake now. You might as well say what you called me for." Then Charlotte talked to her friend. She told her about Kyle, how he made her happy, made her laugh, how tall he was, how attractive he was, and how torn she was about the whole situation. She asked Michelle, "Isn't it weird to like someone for just a few weeks later?" When Michelle spoke again, her voice was clear, and she said, "It sounds to me like you are limiting yourself. If you like him, then go for him. I'm not saying you should delve right into something serious if you don't want to. All I'm saying is you deserve happiness. And if Kyle makes you happy, then be with him." When Michelle asked her if it was not weird that she liked Kyle, barely after leaving an engagement, Michelle told her, "You see, Charlotte, when we leave a relationship, the pain we feel isn't only as a result of being left with our hearts in our hands. Most of the time, the pain is accompanied by the anger of our time wasted, and the energy we put in that failed to yield favorable results. To me, what hurt you about Mason was you wasted your time and energy, and what hurt you the most was the fact that Ava betrayed your trust. Yes, you cared deeply for Mason and you loved him at one point, but I will be honest with you, Carr. You struck gold by not marrying him. He was not right for you." Charlotte did not know whether or not to believe Michelle. She so badly wanted to try with Kyle, and as Michelle said, she necessarily did not have to have something deep. They could just have fun and see where that would lead them to. But on the Mason part, she could be right. She did care deeply for him, and she did feel betrayed by Ava. And Ava and Mason betrayed her and were busy living together. She should be able to live her life as well. Even if it was a mistake leaping with Kyle, it was her life, and she could make the mistake if she damn well pleased. After all, she had been careful all her life, and look where it landed her. Michelle urged her to try it with Kyle, and she said she would. She asked about Megan's well-being, and they said goodnight, and then they cut the line. When she woke up the next day, there were 16 texts from Ava, and all led down to the same thing. She was asking if she could see her, and she apologized for hurting her. She deleted the messages and got out of bed. She had begun to miss her sister, and quite frankly, she did not know how long she could continue to ignore her. They used to be very close, and they shared everything from secrets to hairdryers. She missed her sister, and she wished she could talk to her, but she was hurt by what Ava had done to her. She had never had so many conflicting emotions at once. But in the meantime, she wanted to deal with Kyle and what he made her feel. She wore a blue bikini, put on a cover-up, and went out to the pool. As expected, Kyle was there on a deck chair and looked up at the sky with his sunglasses-covered eyes. She wondered if he wasn't tired of laying under the sun every day. When she reached him, he must have felt her presence because he pushed his sunglasses and squinted up at her. She smiled at him. "Hi." He beamed back at her. She lowered herself down on his lap. Shocked, he went rigid at once. Her hands went around his neck. Charlotte, what are you doing?" She adjusted herself on his lap as she said, "I like you too." His body began to relax, and he said, "I know." She smiled at him. "You are too cocky." He replied, "I know." Then she laughed and playfully slapped his arm. Kyle grew serious and said, "But you were in something serious just a few months back." She nodded. "Yes, I was, and I'm done with that now. I'm not saying that I'm ready for something serious now, but we could take it slow and see where things go from there. Is that okay with you?" He breathed heavily. "Yes, it is. It really is." Then she bent her head to meet his lips in a kiss. 2 weeks later, Charlotte flew back to Chicago. The vacation had ended, and it was time for her to get back to her real life. The last week with Kyle had been blissful. and he had a flight on the same day as her from Maui, only his was to San Francisco. He promised to come see her a week after he settled down in his place. When she arrived at the airport, her dad was there smiling brightly at her. She ran to him and they met in a familial embrace. He kissed the side of her head and she laughed in his arms. Then he said he brought someone to meet her. Ava walked out to meet her from her dad's car. She wore the ring, the same one that Charlotte had thrown at Mason. But Charlotte did not feel the surge of anger that she had felt when she first saw the photo on Megan's phone. Her blood turned cold, however, and she turned to face her father. "What have you done, Dad? I told you that I didn't want to see her." Her father's eyes were sad and his voice soft as he told her, "Car, darling, I understand that you were hurt by your sister, but please, listen to her. Please, you don't have to forgive her, just listen to her. For my sake, please." Ava stood at the corner, her hands tucked together and her lower lip rolled in. Charlotte recognized that look. It was how she had been when she had to tell her dad that she might drop out of college. That was how she stood whenever she was nervous. Charlotte looked back at her dad. He gave a slight nod to her, so she walked to her sister. Ava's eyes went wild as she saw her sister approach her. She shifted on one foot. "Hey, Car." Charlotte did not want to beat around the bush. "Go on, say it, Ava." Ava released a nervous breath. Then she said, "Did you get my text?" Charlotte nodded that she did, and Ava started to cry. "I'm so sorry, Car. Really. I know that what I did was awful, and I sincerely apologize for it." Out of curiosity, Charlotte asked her, "So why did you do it?" "Why, Ava?" Ava's hands fell helplessly by her sides as she cried. "I don't know. It's not like I actively planned to do that to you. It's just one day Mason and I were making jokes while we waited for you to show up to dinner, and the next day we started texting. I began to like him, and I didn't want to. I constantly felt dirty, and I knew that I was betraying your trust. I tried to stop it, but I was already in love with him. I'm so sorry. There were a lot of times that I wanted to tell you, but I just did not know how to go ahead with it. That was why I hardly helped you with any wedding decorations. I constantly felt guilty. I'm so sorry that I betrayed your trust. I'm sorry that I eloped with your fiancé. Please forgive me. I cannot continue to live without you in my life, please." By then, she was openly weeping, and her voice cracked so hard. There was snot out of her nose, and her small frame looked even smaller as she hunched her shoulders in defeat. Even if Charlotte wanted to say no to her, she could not. So she said, "Stop crying, Ava." Ava cleaned rapidly at her cheek, but the tears continued to flood out, and she said, "I'm trying." Her voice sounded so frustrated that it made Charlotte laugh out dryly. Hope glimmered in Ava's eyes, and she looked shockingly at her sister. "You're laughing." "You're laughing? Char, does that mean you can forgive me?" Charlotte shook her head no. "Ava, you hurt me. I mean, you are my sister, and if anyone was going to stab me in that way, you were the last person I would have expected. I'm still hurt by what you did to me, and I would need some time to get over this and consider your apology. And that is all I can give you for now." Ava nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, please. That is all I can ask from you." As Charlotte turned to grab her suitcase, Ava asked in a tiny voice, "Can I hug you, Car?" Charlotte had missed her sister, and she wanted to hug her as well, so stretched out her arms at her, and she ran into her arms. "I'm so sorry, Car. I promise I will spend my whole life making it up to you." It felt nice to have her sister in her arms, and she held her tightly. She had missed her. Their dad joined them in the hug, and they held themselves tighter. When they parted, Ava's eyes had stopped to water, and their dad smiled at both of them. Charlotte said she would reach out to Ava when she was ready, and after another hug, they went their separate ways, and Charlotte went back to Michelle's. She planned to go apartment hunting the next day, and as soon as she could, she would resume her work in their bake shop. As she laid in Michelle's and Megan's bedroom that night, Kyle called her, and they talked for hours on end. Things were finally looking up for her. Maybe it wasn't all bad that she went on to her sister's apartment even after Miss Sue ignored her. Maybe that was the way things were supposed to turn out. It hadn't been particularly rosy, but she was glad to be where she was.